Iran, known as Persia until 1935, stands as one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations, with a history stretching back over 4,000 years. From the mighty Persian empires that once controlled vast swaths of the ancient world to the modern Islamic Republic, Iran's story is one of conquest and culture, revolution and religion, tradition and transformation. This land has witnessed the rise of Zoroaster and the spread of Islam, produced poets like Hafez and Ferdowsi, and survived invasions by everyone from Alexander the Great to the Mongols. To understand Iran today, we must journey through millennia of triumphs and tragedies that have shaped this remarkable nation. Our story begins in ancient times when the Elamite civilization flourished in southwestern Iran as early as 3200 BCE. These early inhabitants built impressive cities and developed one of the world's first writing systems, but it was the arrival of Indo-European peoples around 1500 BCE that would fundamentally reshape the region. Among these migrants were the Aryans, whose name would give us Iran, meaning land of the Aryans. These nomadic tribes settled across the Iranian plateau, bringing with them new languages, customs, and the seeds of what would become Persian culture. The first great Iranian empire emerged with the Medes in the 7th century BCE. From their capital at Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan, the Medes united the Iranian tribes and even brought down the mighty Assyrian Empire, one of the most feared powers of the ancient world. But the Median kingdom's glory was short-lived. In 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great, king of the small Persian kingdom of Anshan, overthrew his Median grandfather and established what would become the largest empire the world had yet seen. Cyrus founded the Achaemenid Empire, and his conquests were as remarkable for their speed as for their tolerance. Unlike previous conquerors who imposed their culture on defeated peoples, Cyrus respected local customs and religions. When he conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he freed the Jewish exiles held there, earning praise in the Hebrew Bible as a Messiah. The Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first charter of human rights, proclaimed religious freedom and prohibited slavery. This policy of tolerance would become a hallmark of Persian governance. Under Cyrus's successors, particularly Darius the Great, the empire expanded from India to Egypt, from Central Asia to the Balkans. The Achaemenids built magnificent capitals at Pasargadae and Persepolis, created the royal road spanning thousands of miles, and established an efficient administrative system, dividing the empire into satrapies. They introduced the world's first postal system, standardized weights and measures, and created a common currency. At its height, the Persian Empire encompassed nearly half the world's population, but even the mightiest empires faced challenges. The Persian wars with Greece, immortalized in Western history through battles like Marathon and Thermopylae, marked the beginning of Achaemenid decline. Though the Persians burned Athens and won many victories, they ultimately failed to conquer Greece. These wars would have far-reaching consequences when a young Macedonian king named Alexander decided to return the favor. In 334 BCE, Alexander the Great invaded the Persian Empire. Despite having a much smaller army, his tactical genius and the Persian Empire's internal weaknesses led to a series of stunning victories. The final Achaemenid king, Darius III, fled the battlefield at Gaugamela, and Alexander captured the Persian capitals. In a drunken rage, he burned the magnificent palace at Persepolis, destroying countless treasures and records. With Alexander's conquest, Iran entered a new phase of its history. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented. Iran fell under the Seleucid dynasty, one of Alexander's successor states. This began a period of Hellenistic influence, with Greek culture blending with Persian traditions. But the Iranians never fully accepted foreign rule. In 247 BCE, the Parthians, an Iranian people from the northeast, began their revolt against Seleucid rule. Over the next century, they gradually conquered Iran and Mesopotamia, establishing an empire that would last 400 years. The Parthians faced a new challenger in Rome, and their rivalry would define Middle Eastern politics for centuries. The Parthians perfected the tactics of mounted archery, devastating Roman legions at battles like Carrhae. They maintained the Persian tradition of tolerance and decentralized rule, allowing local dynasties to govern under Parthian supremacy. But this decentralization eventually became a weakness, and in 224 CE, the last Parthian king fell to a rebellion from Fars, the ancient Persian heartland. The Sassanid dynasty claimed descent from the Achaemenids and sought to restore Persian glory. They made Zoroastrianism the state religion, built fire temples throughout the empire, and created a more centralized government than their Parthian predecessors. Under great kings like Shapur I and Khosrow I, the Sassanids rivaled Rome and later Byzantium as a superpower. They developed advanced irrigation systems, promoted learning and translation of Greek and Indian texts, and created the game of chess. For 4 centuries, the Sassanids ruled one of the world's most sophisticated empires. Their capital at Ctesiphon was among the largest cities in the world, and Persian culture influenced everything from Roman military reforms to Indian astronomy. But constant warfare with Byzantium exhausted both empires, leaving them vulnerable when an unexpected threat emerged from the Arabian desert. In 637 CE, Arab armies inspired by the new religion of Islam invaded Iran. The Sassanid Empire, weakened by decades of war and plague, collapsed remarkably quickly. The last Sassanid king, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward and was assassinated in 651, ending over 1,000 years of Zoroastrian Persian empires. This conquest would transform Iran profoundly, but not in the way the Arab conquerors might have expected. While Iranians gradually converted to Islam over the following centuries, they maintained their distinct identity. As the scholar Bernard Lewis noted, Iran was indeed Islamized, but it was not Arabized. Persians preserved their language, adapted their ancient administrative traditions to serve new Muslim rulers, and profoundly shaped Islamic civilization. Iranian scholars, poets, scientists, and administrators became the backbone of the Islamic Golden Age. From the mathematician al-Khwarizmi, who gave us algebra, to the physician Ibn Sina, whose medical texts were used in Europe for centuries, Persians made Islam a world civilization. The process of Persianization began almost immediately after the Arab conquest. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE, which overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate, succeeded largely due to Persian support. The new Abbasid capital at Baghdad was built near the old Sassanid capital, and Persian administrative practices became the norm. Local Iranian dynasties, like the Tahirids and Samanids, gained autonomy, patronizing Persian literature and culture. The Persian language, written in Arabic script, emerged as the second language of Islam, used for poetry and administration from India to the Ottoman Empire. This cultural renaissance reached its peak with Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, completed around 1010 CE. This epic poem, recounting Iran's mythical and historical past, helped preserve Persian language and identity through centuries of foreign rule. It took roughly 400 years for Iran to transform from a Zoroastrian empire to a predominantly Muslim, Persian-speaking region. But the synthesis created a unique civilization that would influence the Islamic world for centuries to come. The relatively peaceful development of Perso-Islamic culture came to a catastrophic end in 1219 when Genghis Khan's Mongol armies invaded Iran. The destruction was apocalyptic. Entire cities were erased, irrigation systems that had functioned for millennia were destroyed, and millions died. Some regions saw population declines of 90%. The Mongol conquest was perhaps the greatest catastrophe in Iranian history, and some areas didn't recover their pre-Mongol population until the 20th century. Yet even from this devastation, Persian culture showed its resilience. The Mongol Ilkhanate that ruled Iran gradually became Persianized, converting to Islam and patronizing Persian art and literature. They even sponsored the mass copying of the Shahnameh, helping preserve Persian identity. But just as Iran began to recover, another devastating invasion came in the late 14th century when Timur, claiming to emulate Mongol brutality, carved out his empire. His campaigns were, if anything, more destructive than the original Mongol invasions. From the ashes of these catastrophes emerged the Safavid dynasty in 1501, marking one of the most important turning points in Iranian history. The Safavids weren't just another dynasty, they fundamentally transformed Iran's religious identity. Shah Ismail Thurfa, the teenage founder of the dynasty, declared Twelver Shia Islam the state religion, launching a massive conversion campaign that would make Iran the bastion of Shia Islam it remains today. This decision had profound consequences. Sunni Muslims, who had been the majority, faced persecution and forced conversion. The Safavids imported Shia clerics from Lebanon and Bahrain to teach their interpretation of Islam. They created new religious ceremonies, particularly the mourning rituals for Hussein, the martyred grandson of Prophet Muhammad, which became central to Iranian Shia identity. This religious transformation also had geopolitical implications, putting Iran in permanent conflict with the Sunni Ottoman Empire. Under Shah Abbas the Great, who ruled from 1588 to 1629, the Safavid Empire reached its zenith. He moved the capital to Isfahan, transforming it into one of the world's most beautiful cities with the famous phrase, Isfahan Nesf-e-Jahan, Isfahan is half the world. The magnificent mosques, bridges and bazaars built during his reign still stand as testimonies to Safavid architectural achievement. Abbas modernized the army, promoted trade with Europe, and created a period of prosperity and cultural flowering. But the Safavid dynasty, like many before it, eventually succumbed to weak rulers and internal strife. In 1722, Afghan invaders captured Isfahan, effectively ending Safavid rule. The following decades saw Iran fragment into competing kingdoms until Nader Shah, a military genius from a humble background, reunited the country in 1736. Nader's conquests extended Persian rule from the Caucasus to Delhi, but his increasingly tyrannical rule and attempts to restore Sunni Islam alienated his subjects. His assassination in 1747 plunged Iran back into chaos. The late 18th century saw various dynasties compete for control until the Qajars, a Turkic tribe, established their rule in 1794. The Qajar period coincided with the age of European imperialism, and Iran found itself caught between the expanding Russian Empire to the north and British India to the south. This great game between Britain and Russia would dominate Iranian politics for over a century. The Qajars presided over a period of territorial loss and national humiliation. Through a series of disastrous wars with Russia, Iran lost the Caucasus, including modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchay didn't just strip Iran of territory, they imposed capitulations, giving foreign powers legal immunity in Iran and control over Iranian tariffs. These humiliating concessions sparked the first stirrings of modern Iranian nationalism. The weakness of the Qajar state became increasingly apparent as the 19th century progressed. When Nasser al-Din Shah granted a British company a complete monopoly over Iranian tobacco in 1890, it sparked massive protests. Led by merchants and clerics, the tobacco protest of 1891 forced the Shah to cancel the concession, demonstrating for the first time that popular mobilization could challenge royal authority. This event is often seen as the precursor to the constitutional revolution. By the early 20th century, frustration with Qajar incompetence and foreign domination reached a breaking point. In 1906, protests led by an unlikely alliance of merchants, clerics, and intellectuals forced Mozaffar ad-Din Shah to accept a constitution and parliament, or Majlis. The constitutional revolution marked Iran's first experiment with democracy and the rule of law. For the first time, the Shah's power would be limited by elected representatives. But the path to democracy proved rocky. Mohammad Ali Shah, with Russian support, bombarded the parliament in 1908 and attempted to restore absolute rule. This sparked a civil war, with constitutionalist forces eventually prevailing and deposing the Shah. However, the victory was Pyrrhic. The Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907 had already divided Iran into spheres of influence, and the constitutionalists found themselves unable to assert real independence. The constitutional revolution's democratic ideals would inspire future generations, but its immediate impact was limited. World War I brought new catastrophes. Despite declaring neutrality, Iran became a battlefield for Ottoman, Russian, and British forces. The country suffered from famine, disease, and economic collapse. By war's end, the Qajar state barely functioned. Into this chaos stepped Reza Khan, a soldier from humble origins who would transform Iran more radically than any ruler since the Safavids. In 1921, Reza Khan led a military coup, becoming the power behind the throne before deposing the last Qajar Shah in 1925 and establishing the Pahlavi dynasty. Reza Shah, as he became known, was Iran's great modernizer. He built the Trans-Iranian Railway, established a modern army, created a secular education system, and forced nomadic tribes to settle. He reformed the legal system, reducing clerical power, and even mandated Western dress, famously banning the veil for women. These reforms came at a cost. Reza Shah brooked no opposition, crushing dissent and ruling as a dictator. His modernization was forced and often superficial, alienating traditional society without creating genuine development. His nationalism took on racial overtones, emphasizing Iran's Aryan heritage and even changing the country's international name from Persia to Iran in 1935 to emphasize this connection. Reza Shah's balancing act between great powers failed during World War II. His perceived pro-German sympathies led to an Anglo-Soviet invasion in 1941. Forced to abdicate, he went into exile, leaving his young son, Mohammad Reza, as Shah. The new Shah initially ruled as a constitutional monarch, but the discovery of massive oil reserves had already made Iran a prize in the emerging Cold War. The 1950s brought Iran's oil to the forefront of politics. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, a passionate nationalist, led the movement to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which had been controlled by the British since 1901. His confrontation with Britain made him a hero to many Iranians, but alarmed Western powers. In 1953, a CIA-orchestrated coup overthrew Mossadegh and consolidated the Shah's power. This event would poison Iranian-American relations for generations. With American support, Mohammad Reza Shah embarked on ambitious modernization programs. The White Revolution of the 1960s redistributed land, gave women the vote, and promoted literacy and healthcare. Iran's economy boomed with oil revenues. Tehran became a modern metropolis, and the country seemed poised to become a developed nation. The Shah spoke of making Iran the world's fifth power and celebrated 2,500 years of Persian monarchy with a lavish ceremony at Persepolis in 1971. But beneath the glittering surface, discontent simmered. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, brutally suppressed dissent. Rapid modernization disrupted traditional society without providing adequate alternatives. Income inequality soared despite economic growth. The Shah's close ties to America and Israel alienated religious conservatives and leftists alike. Most significantly, his attacks on the clerical establishment united religious opposition under an exiled Ayatollah named Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini had been exiled in 1964 for opposing the Shah's reforms. From Iraq and later France, he developed a revolutionary ideology fusing Shia Islam with anti-imperialism. His message that the Shah was an illegitimate puppet of America destroying Iran's Islamic identity resonated with many Iranians. Through smuggled cassette tapes, Khomeini became the symbol of resistance to the Shah's regime. The revolution began in 1978 with protests over a newspaper article insulting Khomeini. Each funeral for protesters killed by security forces became a new protest, creating a cycle of escalating confrontation. By autumn, strikes paralyzed the country. The Shah, ill with cancer and unsure of American support, vacillated between concession and repression. On January 16, 1979, he left Iran for vacation, never to return. Khomeini's return on February 1, 1979, was triumphant. Millions greeted him as he proclaimed the birth of an Islamic republic. The broad coalition that had united against the Shah, clerics, liberals, leftists, and nationalists, quickly fractured. Khomeini and his supporters systematically eliminated their rivals, creating a theocratic state based on his concept of velayat-e-faqih, or rule by Islamic jurists. The Islamic Revolution didn't just change Iran's government, it transformed society, mandating Islamic law, reversing women's rights, and purging Western influences. The new regime faced immediate challenges. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein, seeing an opportunity in Iran's chaos, invaded in 1980, beginning an 8-year war that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives. The war solidified the Islamic Republic's hold on power while devastating Iran's economy and infrastructure. The conflict saw the use of chemical weapons, human wave attacks, and the targeting of cities, leaving deep scars on Iranian society. Since the revolution, Iran has remained under clerical rule, though the system has evolved. The reformist movement of the 1990s raised hopes for change, but hardliners retained ultimate power. Iran's nuclear program has brought international sanctions and confrontation with the West. The Green Movement protests of 2009 and the Woman, Life, Freedom uprising that began in 2022 show continuing opposition to the regime, particularly among young Iranians who make up the majority of the population. Today's Iran is a country of contradictions. It maintains the institutional structures of a republic, elections, parliament, and presidency, while ultimate power rests with the unelected supreme leader. It has a highly educated population, particularly women who make up the majority of university students, living under restrictive religious laws. It possesses a rich cultural heritage spanning millennia, while its government promotes a narrow interpretation of Islamic identity. The story of Iran is far from over. From the ancient Persians who created the world's first superpower to today's Islamic Republic, Iran has shown remarkable resilience and adaptability. Through invasions and revolutions, foreign domination and internal strife, Persian culture and identity have endured. Whether Iran's future holds reform, revolution, or continuity, its past reminds us that this ancient land has reinvented itself many times before and doubtless will again. Understanding Iran's history, its glories and tragedies, its achievements and failures, is essential for anyone seeking to comprehend not just Iran itself, but the broader currents shaping our interconnected world.